There's a certain moral from the story of the Megillah, and I've mentioned it in passing, but I want to expand on it now. And I want to do this by telling you an entirely different story, where I think you can feel the moral very strongly, and then we'll trace it back to similar parts of the Megillah, and then we'll try to talk about what it teaches us. There's a story about the Maggid is rich. He was the one who took over the leadership of the Hasidic movement when the Baal Shem Tov died. And one morning, after davening with his disciples, his Talmidim, and they still had talis and tefillin on, he said, let's get in the wagon. Got in the wagon drove for a couple of hours, somewhere into the forest. Came across a clearing with a few houses. They knock on the door, and there's a Jewish family there about to perform a bris milah. They're all alone there, isolated. And here comes the Maggid with his Talmidim, makes a minyan, something very unexpected, great joy. So they come in and they make the bris milah, and the mother takes the baby into another room, and they lay out some food to eat, wash. After a half hour, there's a scream from the other room. Mother comes out and says the baby has died. From great rejoicing to terrible wailing and mourning and sadness. So the Maggid calls for attention, and he says, I want to tell you something. Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, also the author of the famous commentaries, the Beis Yosef, and the Kesef Mishnah, when he was born, he was a sickly baby and did not have his bris milah on the 8th day. He went on to become a great tzaddik and a great gaon of Torah. When he died, and his neshama was going up the levels, came to a certain level, and they said, this is your ceiling. From here on up, you can only go if you had milah on the 8th day, and you didn't have it. So he protested. He wasn't willing to accept it. So there was a whole discussion and debate among the authorities, and they said, listen, the rule is the rule. You cannot break this rule. If you want your soul to go higher up, you have to go back down and get it. You must have a bris milah on the 8th day. You didn't have it, go get it. Said the Maggid of Mizrich to the parents of this child who just died, that was your baby. Your baby had the soul of Rav Yosef Karo. He came into the world just so Rav Yosef Karo's soul could get bris on the 8th day. That's all he needed. That's why he died. There was nothing left for him to do. Don't think that the Kodesh Baruch Hu hates you and that he's punishing you and that you're crippled. No, on the contrary. You were chosen for this very special task of giving such a great soul its final, what we call tikkun, its final perfection. And the proof of it is that we're here. After all, they didn't come because they got an SMS. If they came, and they must have known that something special was going on, they were sent by Ruach HaKodesh to be there to give them that message, so they should understand what happened to them. I think this story has a very profound message, aside from what it says on the surface. Do we really know what's happening? Do we know what's going on? We're living our lives. Things happen, we make preparations, we fix things that go wrong, we make plans, we make investments of time and effort and feeling and care. Do we know what we're doing? To a large extent, we don't know what we're doing. In that case, they were told that you're making a tikkun for this precious neshama. I heard this story when I was living in Baltimore. I was very close to Rav Amram Taub, the Bracha. A family in Baltimore, lovely people, really strong members of the community, lost a baby. They lost a baby who, when he was born, he had all sorts of neurological problems. And after, I don't know how many weeks it was, the baby was died. And they sat Shiva. Now, I understand that sitting Shiva may be questionable. I never checked it out to see why they did it, but they did. And Rabbi Taub asked me to drive him to the Shiva that he should be able to be Menachem. And I was Menachem at the same time. And he told this story to them. He said to them, I'm telling you, you are wonderful people. Don't think because you lost a baby, there's anything wrong with you, that God is punishing you or is alerting you to fix your transgressions. It's not true. I'm telling you, something special needed to be done for that child, and you're the one who was chosen to do something for that soul. It's a little similar to one of the Ger Rebbes who lost his son at the age of 27. And when people came to be Menachem him, and they treated it as if it were a great tragedy, he said, you're thinking about all the years that I didn't have with him. I'm thinking about all the years that I did have with him. In other words, I hope I'm teaching it right, Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't owe me anything. He doesn't owe me anything. I didn't lose something of mine that my son died at the age of 27. He gave me 27 years with this child. That's a great gift. That's not nothing. So the main lesson here, an important lesson here, is that much of the time we don't know what we're doing. We don't know what it's for. We don't know how it's supposed to work. We don't know what its conclusion is, what its consequences are. Sometimes, rarely, HaKadosh Baruch Hu pulls aside the veil and says, here, see? That's what happened. But often not. And this is where you develop your bitachon, your trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because here, you yourself don't have the information to explain it. And your trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that there is an explanation. Just that you don't have the information necessary to explain it. There is an explanation. By the way, emunah in the Hebrew is often translated in English translations as faith. My opinion is that faith is a Christian word and it should not be used in a Jewish context, because faith means something that you believe against reason or without reason. Take it on faith. I don't believe the Torah ever requires that of anyone. To do something that's against reason or do something that's without reason. I would translate emunah as rational trust. It's trust because you don't know for yourself what the explanation is. But it's rational to trust because the source from which it comes is a trustworthy source. It's earned the appropriateness of trust by its consistent behavior. So when you take a medicine because the doctor told you to take it, you don't know why you're taking it. You don't know what it will do for you. But it's not blind. You're not flipping a coin. You're trusting the doctor because he has an education, because he has a license, because he wants to make a living, he wants to have good effect on what he does. So your trust in him is rational. That's what emunah is. Here, when you see things that happen, and you think, wow, that definitely is unusual. That's definitely something which doesn't have a normal explanation. Then you're supposed to learn that the other things that happen to you should be treated in the same way. In many Cedarim, maybe all Cedarim, in the morning, you have the parsha describing the Akedah, Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. There are many people who say it every day. Why? What's so special about that piece of the Chumash? And people would want to say it every day. Well, put yourself in Abraham's position. When the entire story was over, the Medrash quotes Abraham as saying the following to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Listen, when you told me to sacrifice my son, I had a very good objection against you. Because you also told me that my son will be my continuation. Your continuation will come from Yitzchak. Now you're telling me to kill him before he has any children. So you told me two things, and they contradict one another. That was a good objection. I could have raised that as an objection against you. But I didn't. Just as I didn't raise my objection against you, so I'm asking you not to raise your objections against my children, who will transgress, who will violate the Torah, and you'll have a justified complaint against them. Don't you raise your complaint against them either. So, but from this medrash, what we see is that the contradiction between sacrifice your son and your son will be your continuation is a real contradiction. There's no tricky way out. You know, you're not going to say that Avram missed the logic or the Zohar has a way out. No. It's a real contradiction. How did Abraham do it? How did Abraham do it? What did he think was going on? What he thought was going on, I'm saying, is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me to do this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world for the sake of certain principles. I trust that he's going to live up to those principles, even though I can't see how, in this case, that could happen. I have no explanation as to how it could happen. It doesn't have to have an explanation for me. When people reject something on the grounds that it's obviously wrong, they forget two words. They forget to say it's obviously wrong to me. It's obvious to me that it's wrong. Does it follow from it's obvious to me that it's wrong? That it's wrong? Maybe not. Maybe what's obvious to me is incorrect. Maybe I'm making a mistake. Abraham says, I trust, and I have a reason to trust, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing this, and he's doing this in such a way that will work out consistently with his principles of loving kindness and justice, even though I don't know how. And I think, now I'm not taking this from any commentators, but I think, if you look at Abraham's experience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's had more than 60 years of consistent experience that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has unlimited power, unlimited understanding, unlimited control and knowledge of the future, so that if in the final instance, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him to do something, and Abraham says, can I understand this or can't I? This one's really tough. Golly, I'm facing a contradiction. I don't see how that works. From that reflection, he can point the finger at himself and say, so I don't see it, so what? That doesn't mean it has to be wrong. So let's see. God says to Abraham, leave your land, leave your homeland, your family and everything else. Go to the land that I will tell you. That's where you're going to become a great nation. Fine, he leaves. Decades go by and decades go by. Nothing happens. Nothing happens. Then he has a child, Yishmael, when he's 86. His wife doesn't have any children. When they're 100, they have a child. Wow. So it came true. Had to wait a long time, but it came true. Abraham goes down to Egypt, and Pharaoh has Sarah taken into the palace because he wants to marry her. There's a plague, a supernatural plague. Pharaoh comes running. Take her, you didn't tell me she's your wife, I wouldn't have done this, and leave us. And makes him very rich. What do you see? Someone takes Sarah, there's a miracle right away to save her. Goes back, there's a war, 4 kings come with a military sweep of the whole area, and they conquer 5 kings and capture his nephew Lot, and Abraham wants to free his nephew Lot, goes to war against the 4 kings, and in one night he defeats all of them. It's over. Open miracle, because his nephew is captured, and Abraham wants to free him. Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham tells God tells him, I'm going to destroy them, and Abraham pleads for them, and the next day it's a ruin. So he knows God told him beforehand, and it happened. It happened right in front of his eyes. It's a public event. He's not dreaming anything here. And this sort of thing happens over and over again. So Abraham says, I'm dealing with a source, capital S, that's overwhelmingly great. Great in power, great in knowledge, great in control, and great in caring for me. All these things he did for me. Bris Bein Besarim, another miracle. So now when God tells him to do something, he thinks, boy, this is a tough one because I don't understand it. Seems to me to be an open contradiction. But given my experience with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, I have reason to trust that there is an explanation that I, at the present, cannot understand. That's rational trust. That's what I would one way to translate emunah. Even though emunah bitachon are treated as separate, okay, I'm aware of that, but I think that's not. It's a better translation in English. So, why do we read that? Some people read that every morning because things like that happen to us also. Things happen where we cannot see what the explanation could possibly be. We're being told, just like Abraham couldn't see, and in the end it turned out to have a resolution. Not everything do you see the resolution, but it has an explanation. Childlessness. Great people had no children. Sat Marov had no children. Tzvika Shalevsky, with whom I had the great merit, pleasure, kindness to learn with for a year when I first came to Eretz Yisrael. Lubavitcher Rebbe. There are people who are great people and didn't have children. Can we understand that? Can we put that together? Not really. But the message here is that we very often don't understand. Now, it's interesting, the Rambam writes this, and the Ramchal writes this, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. The Rambam says on the basis of tzedek, of what's just, and very often we don't see it. And Rabbi Marzman, who was explaining these things to me, mentioned a Rashi in Sanhedrin, where it has it shows us in a very dramatic way. There was a town in which there were two funerals on the same day. One was the funeral of a Talmid Chacham, a great scholar. The other was the funeral of a crooked tax collector, someone who collected taxes from Jews and collected extra for himself, and like a thief. As they were carrying the two bodies to the place to be buried, there was an attack on the town by enemies, and of course everybody ran. Only one disciple of the Talmid Chacham stayed in the cemetery with the bodies. Hours later, when the attackers left and the people came back, there was such a hurry to finish the burials that they mixed up the bodies. And the protests of the disciple, they didn't hear the protest, they didn't credit it, and they buried the tax collector in the great rabbi's plot, and they buried the great rabbi in the tax collector's plot. And the disciple was terribly upset. So that night, he had a dream in which the Talmid Chacham, the scholar, came to him and said, "Don't be upset. I'll tell you why it happened. Because it happened to me because once I was in the presence of a great scholar, and people there were criticizing him and making fun of him, and I didn't come to his defense. So, in a lifetime of greatness, a lifetime of scholarship, teaching, lifetime of righteous behavior, but that was a mistake. That I did wrong. So I was being punished for that. And the tax collector used to make banquets for the king as a bribe in order to get favors from the king. Once he set up and created the banquet, the king didn't come. On that occasion, he gave the food from the banquet to the poor. So he had to be rewarded for that. So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged that this mistake should be made, that he should be buried in a good place and I should be buried in a bad place. So now, if the Talmid Chacham had not come to his disciple in a dream, we'd look at this and say, "This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. Why should something like this happen?" The answer in this case is there are things that happen that you don't know. And once you know them, then you can understand it very well. Most of the time, we don't know. That was the great chesed that Rabbi Taub did, to go to that family and to say, "I know in your case that it isn't what you think, that you have to check your actions and think that you're a failure and you have hidden faults, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like you, and so on. No, that's not right. They needed to know that because otherwise they could be sent on a false and depressed is too strong a word, but they could be upset and worried about their spiritual state, their spiritual accomplishments. He said, no, that's not the right shot. So we have to put up with the fact that very often things happen to us and we don't know why they happen. Now, having said that, in the Megillah, that's for sure correct, right? The party at the beginning and throwing out Vashti and Esther being chosen as queen and Mordechai overhearing the plot and saving the king's life. You're living there and you're observing these events. They look absolutely meaningless. They look absolutely random, without any purpose or significance at all. At the end of the story, you see they were all planned. They were all planned, they were all gerrymandered to get to the outcome. So one of the lessons from the story is when you feel that you don't understand, be honest, don't fool yourself. Yes, you don't understand. And know that because Baruch Hu wants you to live with that. Sometimes I picture Avram and Sarah, and let's say they have friends, and there are carpools and birthday parties, and and bar mitzvahs and bas mitzvahs, and cutting the child's hair when he's 3 years old, and they're there and they have no children. Decade after decade, they have no children. How does that feel? How does that how do we understand that? Or take Moses. Moses, the age of 17 or so, runs because Pharaoh wants to kill him. And the next thing we hear about is when he's 80 years old. 60 years go by. 60 years is a long time. What was he doing for 60 years? So Medrash says he was king in Ethiopia. Terrific. You think he was happy? You think he felt fulfilled as king in Ethiopia? To him, that's not life, it's not living, it's not exiled from the Jewish people, from their experience. He had no clue that he was destined to be the savior, to take them out of Egypt and then bring the Torah down from heaven. He had to live 60 years with that kind of ignorance and living in the dark. And these are very, very great people. So, think of ourselves and our own lives, where we often don't understand why things happen. I have to be able to have the rational trust that there is a reason that it's happening, and that it's in the hands of someone with a capital S, who's running the entire affair to bring it out to the best possible outcome.
My cousins, second cousins. For a while, they couldn't have a child. They went to many different Rabbeim. I know they went to a Gottleib somewhere. I don't remember who it was. But in the aftermath, their first kids were triplets. And then after that was another set of triplets.
Wow.
And then another set of triplets. And then 2 sets of twins.
Wow.
At one point, they had 6 kids at once. Just 6 babies running around. 12.
Yeah.
Most of them are already married.
I know a couple from South Africa. They went 20 years without children. She ran the pre-marriage educational system for kalas, for brides in Johannesburg. She's running this. Of course, when they get married, they have children. She's invited and everything else, and she has no children. So then they decided to adopt. I think they adopted 2 children, if I'm not mistaken. And then they went to Rabbi Yosef, and he said, "You'll have a child." And within a year, they had a child. And then they had several more. So, after 20 years. I'll tell you one more story. A boy came in here, this was maybe 30 years ago. He said, "Rabbi, you don't have to talk to me about God. I know God exists. Tell me about the Torah, Sinai, and so forth and so on, but I know God exists." I said, "Really? How do you know?" He said, "Well, I'll tell you. My mother had a pregnancy when she was 30. It was very, very badly, and there was surgery, and the doctors told her, you're not going to have any more children." Okay, she's not going to have any more children. Of course, she didn't take any precautions. When she was 43, she started putting on weight. Well, so do a lot of other people. Men and women start putting on weight. And putting on weight. Finally, something nudges her to go and check, and she finds out that she's 7 months pregnant. She didn't dream of that because they told her, the doctors, and they know everything, right? The doctors told her she couldn't possibly get pregnant. She told, and this was this boy, he was the fetus. She told him later, if I had found out within the first 3 months, I would have had an abortion. They told me I can't have children, and I'm pregnant. Something terrible is going to happen. I would have had an abortion right away, but 7 months you don't have an abortion. So he says, I know there's a God.
After several months.
Sorry?
What do you mean several months?
Seven. After 7. If she said, if I had found out that I was pregnant within the first 3 months of pregnancy, then I would have had an abortion.
But after 7 months.
But after 7 months, the child is learning. The child is fully formed and functioning in the womb. Children of that age, fetuses that age, are learning already. Like you can test what they know. So at that point, you're killing a human being, for sure. Okay, when the neshama comes, Jewish, non-Jewish, okay, I understand that. I know all that. I'm just saying that...
It was just up on her moral standards. At 7 months, she's willing to give up her own life.
She wasn't thinking of dying. I think she was like, if the medical profession tells me I'm not going to have children and I'm pregnant, something's desperately wrong. Something's wrong, and I don't want to go through it. But you don't kill a 7-month fetus. That's much too late. And he was perfectly normal, born well, and so he came in. So now, put yourself in her place. First of all, this terrible thing happened when she was 30. And then, against all medical opinion, she gets pregnant, and she gets pregnant at a time when she can't do an abortion, right? Well, how did she feel? What does she think? Well, I don't know what's going on. My life is coming apart. It's going to pieces. And then this lovely boy is born. He's normal. He's healthy. I have a daughter who had CMV. That's a kind of disease which, if the baby has it also, it's associated with certain types of difficulties with the baby. So she went, she did absolutely nothing. She had the baby, but born 6 months old. Take the tipat chalav in this country. If you're not listening from this country, they have a government service that checks the growth and development of babies. Usually very good. That's a very, very sensitive way that they do it. So she's in there at TV. The doctor's looking through the chart. She says, "Hey, you had CMV, and I see they tested the baby's blood, and he also had CMV. Why did you do that? Why don't you have an abortion?" So she said, "We figured we'll let him get born and check him, and if he's no good, we'll kill him then." That's what she said, like on the spot. Of course she didn't mean it, but their attitude is, well, if there's anything that's not perfect and is taking a chance, have an abortion. We don't do that, thank you very much. We don't do that. So, and Baruch Hashem, he's spectacular. He's absolutely spectacular. There's no handicaps, and he's first class. Just got married a few months ago. So, you have to get used to living with things happening that you don't understand. And if you get used to that, again, not because you make your peace with irrationality, with randomness in the world, not like the existentialists. I will spare you my anti-French prejudices or critique, but declare the world is meaningless. The whole philosophy was based on the idea that the world is meaningless, right? I wonder how I read them, how they come to that conclusion? By proving something? Not really. It was fashionable to be giving up religion, and without religion, meaning was hard to find, so they drew the conclusion that the world is meaningless. Okay. So it's not that you say, some things just happen, they happen for no reason, there's no explanation, just have to get used to the fact that the world is random. That's not our point of view. From our point of view, things happen for a reason. Just that, very often. We don't know what the reason is. And here, like the Rambam said, if it's a question of being rewarded for something that you did was good or punished for something that you did was bad, you may very well not know, and certainly the observer will not know what it is that you did and how this particular outcome is right for you. That's why it's appropriate. Why did the scholar and the tax collector, one get rewarded, one get punished by being buried in the wrong plot? Couldn't they have been rewarded and punished with money, or with extra children, or with fame, or something? Why was this the right outcome for the things they did wrong? Very, very difficult for us to know. You have to get used to looking at life that way. Now, sometimes you can, how should I say this? Having accepted that I don't know why it's happening, that still leaves open the question, what should I do? Sometimes, even without knowing why it's happening, there are things that you should do. Why is the river overflowing? I don't know, but I better build a dam of sandbags to hold it back, otherwise it's going to be terrible destruction. I don't have to know why it's overflowing. I got a report, 200 miles upstream, it's overflowing its banks. Fine, I'm building a sandbag wall here. Sometimes you know what practical outcome should be without knowing what the purpose, what the reason behind it is, what the meaning behind it is. So the question now will become, what should we do when something like this happens? So the Gemara says, if a person sees that calamities are coming upon him, let him examine his actions. Now, there are two ways to look at this. Sometimes, under certain conditions, according to certain commentators, examine what's happening in order to figure out why it's happening, so you'll know what to do to fix it. But given what I just told you, there's another way to take this rule in the Gemara. I'm not saying they're in competition with it. They're both right, and that is, even if I don't know why it's happening, and I'll never know why it's happening, it's always good to check your actions. If you can improve your actions, you'll be better off. No matter what, you'll be better off. So that's the right thing to do, even if you don't discover why the calamities are coming. Similarly, when calamities do come, there's a phrase in Yiddish which is common in our community, which is Zolzana Kapara. Zolzana Kapara means that it should be for an atonement, which means I know I've done things that aren't right. I know that I'm not perfect. The way I accept this suffering, I accept it from God in love, and my accepting it in that way should give me the merit that it should atone for things that I've done wrong. And here, there is a statement in the Tur, it was brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, word by word, which I think expresses this in a very dramatic way. There's a Mishnah in Brachos which says that when something bad happens to a person, he should make a blessing on it. Just like he makes a blessing when something good happens, so he should make a blessing when something bad happens. Now, of course, it's not the same blessing. We don't pretend that the bad thing is good. Bad things happen, and they're really bad. They're bad things for the sake of the good. They will lead to the good. Like Nachum Ish Gamzu said, Gamzu Litova. Rabbi Kiva said, Kol ma da'ovid rachmana l'tav ovid litav. But in the meantime, it's bad. Now, when you make the bracha, the Gemara says, you should make the bracha b'simcha, with joy. That's a little bit of a challenging requirement. I make the bracha dayin ha'emes, because something bad happened. I am in pain. When the Gemara says I should make it with joy, does the Gemara mean don't be in pain? The commentators say, no, that's not what it means. The Bach, for example. It says that the pain is genuine and there should be joy together with the pain. Because the human heart can hold two different emotions at the same time. You can have contradictory emotions at the same time. If you're into psychology, I don't recommend it, but if you are, there's something called a love-hate relationship. And that's genuine. You both love and hate a certain person. Somehow in the relationship there's both love and hate, and that's perfectly normal. It's not a contradiction, it's not something that's not steer like you have in logic where you have to get out of it. No, that's a perfectly normal thing. So what the Gemara is saying here is, yes, you're in pain. The pain is normal. Notice I didn't say it's a mitzvah. That's a sugya in Rosh Hashanah and Sukkah. But it's normal, and you can have joy also. Where does the joy come from when let's say you've lost a parent? You've lost a parent. And you're in terrible pain, but there's also joy. So the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch say, because there are mitzvahs to do, even when you're an oval, when you're mourning, or even before the burial, then you're responsible for the burial, there are mitzvahs to do. And that means that the Kodesh Baruch Hu is asking you to serve him in pain. Serving him in pain is an exquisite service. It's a very precious service. It's one thing to serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu when everything's going well and everything is happy and satisfying. It's another thing to serve him in pain. And the opportunity to perform that exquisite service of the Kodesh Baruch Hu should give a person joy. That's a very precious idea. The fact that I have this opportunity to serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu in pain, which is an exquisite level of service, that gives me joy. And I will mention something, this is a footnote, maybe someone who's watching this will be able to answer this for me. The Mishnah Brura on that statement in the Shulchan Aruch writes that the joy is because of kaparas avonos, because you're able to atone for your sins, like I said before. Why the Mishnah Brura feels he has to introduce something different from what the Torah and Shulchan Aruch say, I have no idea. The Torah and Shulchan Aruch explain themselves where the simcha comes from. They don't mention anything about atoning for prior transgressions. So here's a way in which you can say, I don't know why this happened, but I know what I can do with it. I can show a Kodesh Baruch Hu that my emunah, my rational trust, is still in place, that I accept it as something that he's doing for me, which ultimately will be good for me, litov, not tov, but litov. And in the meantime, I can take joy in the fact that he wants me to serve him under these terrible conditions. So that's one of the ways in which you deal with the fact that you don't know. What should my response be when in fact I don't know? Another thing you can do, and this is not a stira, another thing you can do is pray to a Kodesh Baruch Hu that he should reveal it to you. You can ask him. He may not respond to you, he may not give it to you, but you can pray, because the more you understand, typically, the more you can serve, the deeper your service is. Sometimes the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants service in ignorance. Sometimes he wants it that way. He took away prophecy. We had prophecy for 1,000 years. He took it away because he wants us to serve him without that input. But asking for understanding is always appropriate, and either he'll respond or he won't respond. Asking for understanding is an expression of the faith that there is understanding, it's not blank, and that he has it, and he could give it, and because you're asking him, you're willing to live without it. You're willing to take no as a... That's a very exquisite thing to express. Yeah.
What's the difference between Ruach HaKodesh and prophecy?
So Ramchal in the Derech Hashem writes about this, and he says, first of all, there's a difference in the type of attachment to a Kodesh Baruch Hu between Ruach HaKodesh and prophecy and Nevuah. I'll give it to you in spatial terms, but it's a very profound spiritual idea. In prophecy, which is the higher of the two, you go to him. You're dovek in him. In Ruach HaKodesh, he comes to you. Umashra shchinaso alecha. He provides you with his shchina where you are. But of course, since it's where you are, the experience is influenced by the limitations of where you are. Whereas in prophecy, you step out of where you are. You step, so to speak, into his locus, into his environment. And then the experience is much deeper, much broader, much more revealing. And halachically, there's a gigantic difference. When a prophet tells you to do something, you have to do it. It's a mitzvah sasemi d'oraisa. When a prophet tells you to do, or tells the community to do something, they have to do it. The only exception is Avodah Zarah.
How do we know what Ruach HaKodesh like, is. Same thing as the whole issue with
Who? Who?
Someone who receives something.
Oh.
It's the same thing as dreams. How do you know if it's like?
So the Rambam writes sort of downstream, post facto. He says a person who has nevuah, has prophecy, has no doubts whatsoever, because if it were possible to doubt it, Abraham would not have agreed to sacrifice Isaac. If there had been any doubt whatsoever that it was something else, something not genuine, then he would have said, I can't trust it. So it must be the kind of self-verifying, and if you, I can tell it to you in metaphysical terms, you're asking a psychological question, if I understand you correctly, how can you know for yourself? But he says, the Ramchal says, in Nevuah, what you see is something called Kavod Hashem. There's something called Kavod Hashem, which you're interacting with, and you know that. And Ruach HaKodesh, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. You have an experience, but the idea of there being this thing called Kavod Hashem that you're interacting with is not part of the experience. So that's the criterion for distinguishing between the two.
Yes, but what about just distinguishing between Ruach HaKodesh and just, normal? Oh,
so it's interesting. The Ramchal says the words Nevuah and Ruach HaKodesh have official definitions, precise and limited definitions, and then there's the colloquial use of these terms that we use in talking about life. And Ruach HaKodesh can just mean insight, insight, experience, understanding, and we talk about it in that way within quotation marks, what are called scare quotes. But the Ruach HaKodesh, like Nevuah, you have an experience which delivers to you certain understanding with absolute certainty. Even afterwards, when you think back on it, you have absolute certainty that it's correct.
The majority of these stories of hearing Rabbi saying you'll have the child with 100% certainty in a very specific time frame, and it happens.
You don't know it's 100% certainty. How do you know that?
Well, they say it with the emphasis of 100% certainty.
I don't know.
You don't know that.
You don't know that. You don't know that. You don't know whether they themselves allow the possibility that they'll be wrong. You don't know that. And they do. So Ruach HaKodesh still exists. Nevuah doesn't exist, but Ruach HaKodesh does exist. So it could be that they're having Ruach HaKodesh. That could be. In which case, they would have absolute certainty, and they'll be right every time. But if it's just intuition and just grasp and subtlety of perception, then they could say it, but they wouldn't be expressing 100% certainty, and you might not know the difference. They're going to tell you whether it's Ruach HaKodesh. In fact, when our oldest daughter was 6 years old, she asked us whether the Rabbi had Ruach HaKodesh. So we said, let's go ask. So we went and asked. He said, I'll only tell you this.
Which Rabbi?
Boston Rabbi, my Rabbi. That's how. He said, I'll only tell you this. Anyone who tells you that he has Ruach HaKodesh doesn't. That's what he told us.
That's cryptic.
because people who have it, don't flaunt it in that way. He has said things over the years which I don't see how they could possibly have been said without Ruach HaKodesh. Once, I was together with him for 47 years. From before we were married, children, grandchildren, the whole thing. Once, Friday morning, he called up, I answered the phone, and he said, let me speak to Liba, my wife. Hello, Shalom. No hello, how are you, have a good Shabbos, nothing. I was like zero. Let me speak to her. So I put her on the phone. He says, are you okay? She said, I think so, yeah. He asked her 3 times if she's okay. And then he said, okay, have a good Shabbos. She turned to me, what is going on? Sunday morning, she had a miscarriage. When a woman has a miscarriage, the baby dies about 48 hours before. He knew something was wrong. That's one telephone call in 47 years. Don't tell me he got it right by accident. So, if you want to see, I have a very good friend whose wife is a birth counselor. She happens to have a degree in science, and And when she has a breech baby, the head is inside and the legs are coming out. And she would call the Rebbe, and the doctor wants to do a cesarean. And she said, give me 20... Sorry?
C-section?
Yeah, C-section. And she said, give me 20 minutes. She would call the Rebbe, and in 10 minutes the baby would turn around. That happened to her dozens of times.
The baby would turn around?
Yeah, which happens. Sometimes babies do turn around spontaneously. But every time she called, they turned around, and the baby was born naturally. And, if you just imagine that you're her. You do it over and over and over again. Every time it happens. So, I think there's no question. I remember one boy in Boston when I was there. He had pains in his chest. He went to a doctor, surgeon. Surgeon said, you have a growth and it's dangerous. We have to do surgery now! Check into the hospital now. Tomorrow morning will be the surgery. He went to the Rebbe. Rebbe said, I don't like the surgeon. I don't like what he told you. Go to this surgeon. Go to the second surgeon. Second surgeon says, yes, there is a growth, and it needs, I believe, a limited minor operation, not the major surgery the other one wanted to do. Rabbi said, go with the second surgeon, right? He has grandchildren now. According to the first surgeon, he should be dead. Had to have major surgery. Yeah, but worked out.
What are these Rabbeim that are giving these?
What can I tell you?
Hotlines of just advice without any.
So that's something else. Because what happens is this: they are in a medical referral service, as the Rebbe Zatzal was, as Rabbi Führer here and others do. They have thousands of cases that they have seen from beginning to end. They have knowledge of very wide spectrum of medical conditions. Most specialists have their specialty on top, and that's it. So they may know things that the specialist doesn't know. I have had medical issues, and we go to Benny Fisher, and he has always steered us to good doctors, and we've had good outcomes. So I think.
That's not a rabbi.
Well, okay, but he's doing this full time, free for the community. He will have siyata d'shmaya. He will have siyata d'shmaya.
Is there a Brywitz also?
I don't know.
His medical expertise.
I don't know that he does that at all.
Doesn't he?